Hi, Booktube, and welcome to... Ooh, is this going to be a review? It's going to remind you of a review. If you've followed my channel for a while, you've heard me say I don't often reread books. That's a time issue. It's not a lack of rereadable books. People like me who average 4 books per month and love books, I believe we're going to have a perpetual conflict between revisiting a book that we loved and discovering a new book that we might love just as much or more. In spite this setback, there is one author I do reread, and it only took the mention of her name on YouTube, and that's it. I rearranged my reading plans so I could reread her again. The book we will discuss today, I've read 4 times. That tells you right away, I have a strong attachment. I don't honestly feel like talking about this book the way I would talk about other works of nonfiction. I'm biased, and I think you're going to be able to tell that as we go on. This is a book for creative writers, but the author is confident that the advice could be applicable to all manner of other activities, and even suggests some. I think I can show how revitalizing it can be for readers and Booktube content creators. The book we're looking at today is Wild Mind by Natalie Goldberg, published in 1991 by Ryder, an imprint of Random House. Instead of a summary, we're going to shout out and give some free publicity to the Booktube creator who recently held up his copy of Wild Mind to the camera, and that generated such a surge of memory and affection on my part. It was so powerful, I paused the video so I could pull down my copy from the bookshelves and just hold it. So I want to say thank you very much, Paul Magrs 2474. I think I discovered Paul's channel in April. He was making a different kind of bookshelf tour. He was following the colors of the rainbow, talking about all his red books, all his yellow books, all his orange. You get the idea. And I checked in at purple books because I just was curious to know, well, how many purple books can a person accumulate? It's not a color that you see on covers or spines that often, not as often. Now, it might be my imagination, but his book collection seems to occupy more than one room, and it's exactly my kind of messy. Books are piled up to the ceiling. They're stacked deep. There's extra books in random boxes. There's books on exposed surfaces. Nothing is pristine. Definitely not the books. There's plenty of dog-eared corners and light faded covers and multiple spine creases. These are things I love. And there is a cat. There's a cat named Bernard Socks, and he doesn't hear me begging him to spend more time on camera. Probably he wouldn't pay any attention to me if he could hear. What I appreciate about Paul's channel is how he can capitalize on this book collection, which has obviously been accumulating over decades. He can put something in front of the camera that's not been in the public eye for a while. Maybe it never had much time there in the first place. He reminds me of creators like Roy Reads Anything, The Omnivorous Reader, or Meg Perdue, Books Off the Beaten Path. Channels that are so refreshing because they're not looking at what's new. They're looking at what was good, but what is being forgotten. Please check out Paul's channel, okay? He's read virtually all Natalie Goldberg's books, whereas I've only done 2. And he's an experienced published writer, so it's really good to get his endorsement for Goldberg's advice. I've put a few links in my description box to his channel and also to the video he did on Wild Mind. We'll do a mini biography of the author and a mini book details. Natalie Goldberg was born in 1948 in Long Island. She was book crazy from the time she could read, and she credits Carson McCullers with inspiring her to write. She's written 14 books, many of which pass on advice drawn from decades of experience teaching literature and creative writing. She's also a poet, a painter, and a Zen practitioner. Now, Wild Mind itself is 238 pages long, and my 1993 paperback reprint, it has pretty big bold font. I'd say it must be 14 point. Those pages contain 62 short essays, very short. We're talking about 3 pages each on average. And also in some of those essays, there are suggestions for writing exercises. 35 I've got. Now, all that, of course, it makes the book sound a lot like any number of nonfiction books trying to help people with their creativity or their writing. It doesn't convey what excites me about Wild Mind every time I read it. So what is Wild Mind, anyway? The title reflects Natalie Goldberg's Zen practice. She regards her mind and everyone's mind in two ways. There is the mind which does our everyday calculating, priority arranging, worrying, the mind that judges us and judges other people at the same time. This quality of mind Goldberg calls monkey mind. She's employing a Buddhist concept which can also be called mind monkey. The monkey is a metaphor. It's comparing human thought processes to the behavior of primates like langurs or macaques, continually watching, moving, investigating, clamoring, reacting. This kind of thinking, Goldberg argues, it doesn't need any practice. Our brains think like this to get us through every day. They will think like that whether we want them to, or even when we wish they would shut up. There is a second kind of mind activity, however. It's still energetic, but it's quieter, and you need to take time so that you can free yourself from the fears and anxieties of monkey mind in order to access this other kind of mind. Good writing, according to Goldberg, comes from this mind, and this is what she calls wild mind. Her essays and her exercises are just particular ways to recognize that kind of thinking and choose how to use that frame of mind. Now, do I really believe in wild mind? I'm usually more convinced by the pragmatic than the idealistic. In the case of wild mind, it's possible to conduct your own experiments and draw your own conclusions using Goldberg's suggestions. Her rule for all the writing exercises is the same. Keep your hand moving. Go. Don't edit yet. Don't correct anything. This technique is supposed to get past monkey mind to a more expansive and creative consciousness. There have been other books about creativity which have suggested similar approaches. Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way came out the same year as Wild Mind, 1992, and Cameron's rules for the daily practice of morning pages are almost identical, and I stress the almost. In 1998, there was also the artist and short story writer Roberta Allen. She published fast fiction, but she suggested timed writings done at speed to different prompts. And social psychologist Susan Perry published a 1999 book, Writing in Flow, which included interviews with 75 different writers to talk about this different state of consciousness, which they all acknowledged as the source of their creative work. What makes Wild Mind such a special book for me, then? It's a good question. I've read all the other books I just mentioned. They were interesting. They backed up the ideas that Goldberg had in Wild Mind, but I haven't reread them the way I've reread Goldberg. I don't even have my copy of The Artist's Way anymore. Julia Cameron's book did not sit comfortably. She seemed to assume that everyone who writes is going to do so as a full-time job, and they'll live in some beautiful rural spaces where it's just lovely to step outside, and they're all going to be morning people. The fact that she called her exercises morning pages and insisted they had to be done first before anything else, I just thought, that's just impractical. I prefer Natalie Goldberg because Wild Mind is kinder, more realistic. It allows for people waking up to alarms, needing to feed babies, needing caffeine, needing to do something productive after 5 p.m. in the evening, not before 7 a.m. in the morning. But the other reason I prefer Natalie Goldberg is because the essays she writes in Wild Mind, it's such down-to-earth wisdom. She turns ideas upside down. She gets you to break habits, break free from ideas that have become a restriction. And that's not just in writing. I think Wild Mind could definitely help readers and BookTube content creators. I'm going to share a couple of thoughts along that line. Okay, this will be covering old ground if you saw the coffee break video I put out just after we lost Alice Munro. But Wild Mind addresses the same subject as I did in that coffee break. What should be really driving our BookTube channels? I'm reading from page 136. This is essay 36 called Step Forward. No one cares that much whether you write or not. You just have to do it. For a long time, I thought it mattered. I thought my success in writing would finally win me love. This wasn't a conscious wish, but it was a strong one. Below that desire, I found a cleaner one, a more grounded one. I wrote because I wanted to, because I wanted to step forward and speak. It's okay to embark on writing because you think it will get you love. At least it gets you going, but it doesn't last. After a while, you realize that no one cares that much. Then you find another reason: money. You can dream on that one while the bills pile up. Then you think, well, I'm the sensitive type. I have to express myself. Do me a favor. Don't be so sensitive. Be tough. It will get you further along when you get rejected. Finally, you just do it because you happen to like it. I love how Goldberg says, below that desire, she acknowledges that we all want love, money, but she's telling you, if you want the desire, you want to find the desire that's really going to see you through anything, the good times, the bad times, you got to get below the need for love. You got to get below the need for money, and you've got to find that desire which will be personal to you. What is that thing that you desire to do so much that you would do it in spite anything? The next example is applicable to reading, and it's the always asked question about whether or not to DNF a book. The usual argument in favor of not finishing is life is too short to read a book that we are not enjoying. There's truth in that argument, but I feel it should be held in balance with another argument which says that commitment has benefits which make it worthwhile. Even if you do not spend all the time you're reading happy with the book, the commitment can still pay off. Goldberg insists this principle is true about writing a book, and I sometimes wonder, readers who've never written book-length fiction, do they realize this? Writers don't enjoy the whole process of making a novel. Some parts are better than others. I think it's quite typical, from what I've read anyway, for beginnings to feel fantastic, middles agonizing, sometimes torturous, and endings, mixed feelings. And yet we expect writers to finish the books that they start, that they won't stop it somewhere in the middle and say, life is too short to write a book that I'm not enjoying. I'm going to read this from page 161. It's essay 43, titled Pleasure. A woman I met recently who has a creative writing degree from one of the best universities and is wonderful to talk to about literature said she began 5 novels and never finished one of them. I homed right in. What happened? I asked. You mean you wrote 10 pages and then quit? No, she said. I'd get to page 180, I'd be humming along, and then suddenly I'd lose interest or wouldn't believe in the story anymore. It carried me to page 180 and no further. I grew quiet. It is an act of faith, I said. It's going on when you no longer believe. It's walking right off into that wilderness. I was in the middle of my novel, and I understood. I was busy dragging my ass through the desert myself. Why don't you say that you are allowed one incomplete book, one time you give up, and that's it? Otherwise, once you begin a book, no matter how much you hate it, you finish it. I think that is a good idea because it makes your furnace burn strongly before you begin. You don't just grab an idea willy-nilly and run with it for 4 chapters and quit. Commitment is a matter of pleasure. Let it be deep pleasure. And my final example relates to reviewing books. When we review, we often present value judgments, don't we? Abstract statements like, this book was slow, or the characters were boring, or I loved the writing style. Natalie Goldberg takes an interesting position on these kind of abstract statements, and I think it's good food for thought. This is from page 208, essay 53, called Earn the Right. You have to earn the right to make an abstract statement. You earn this right by using the concrete bricks of detail. Now, she says more about this on page 204. That's from the essay titled Detail. She says, think about it. Life is not abstract. It is not good or bad. It is. A girl is not pretty. Our mind makes that judgment. The girl has red lips, white teeth, freckles brushed across her nose, eyes that hint at lilacs, and she just lifted her right eyebrow. The reader steps away and says, she's pretty. The writer just stays with the eyes, the lips, the chin, and makes no judgments. I like how she says the writer stays with the details and doesn't make judgments. What I think the reviewer can decide is whether or not the details in a book have a certain effect on themselves. But if the reviewer wants to earn the right to pass judgment on a writer's work, Goldberg seems to be saying they'll earn more credibility if they have details from the text to back up their points. But never mind booktube, reading, reviewing. I also love Wild Mind because it makes these observations, they're like little proverbs or Buddhist koans, I suppose. You could write them in calligraphic script and frame the picture, hang it up where you could see it daily, and be reminded of a really useful principle. I'm going to give you just a few examples. Page 212, essays called Procrastination and Writing, says, be tough, but be tough the way a blade of grass is, rooted, willing to lean, and at peace with what's around it. Or from page 180 in the essay called Crossing Boundaries, a man last night in a meeting I went to said he has a job he loves, a wife who is pregnant with their second child, a son who just entered kindergarten and seems to like it, and still he wakes up depressed. He said he looks around him and knows his life is good. I sat there and felt great compassion for him. This is human life. Sometimes nothing makes sense. No one way contains it all. Or this from page 130, an essay about loneliness, where Natalie is talking to her Zen Buddhist teacher about the drawbacks of life as a writer. He says to her, writing is taking you very deep. Continue to write. Writing is very lonely, she says to him. Anything you do deeply is very lonely. But I do not let it toss me away. It is just loneliness. Finally, any suggestions for related or follow-up reading? Paul Magrs told me something I didn't know, and that's that Natalie Goldberg has a new book coming out in a few weeks' time, and it is called Writing on Empty. I gather it's about her lockdown experience, and it's weird how different lockdown was for different people. I mean, speaking just personally, it was liberating, it was helpful, it gave me a better work-life balance, but I also had friends who barely held on to their sanity because their situation at home was not good, it was not healthy, and I gather that Goldberg also had a really tough time. Now, as much as I love Goldberg's writing, I'm probably going to hang on until this new book comes out in paperback, because I want a physical copy, but I don't really want a hardback. And that is my love letter to Natalie Goldberg, if I'm honest. Rereading Wild Mind is acting a bit like a vitamin tonic now, which I'm going to need, because I've just started reading Adam Zamoyski's 557-page account of Napoleon's march on Moscow. I never learned anything about Napoleon at school. Everything I've learned I've taught myself, and so Zamoyski is just contributing to my education. Expect that book to be reviewed in a series of vlogs, like the ones that I did for Orlando 5G's Cultural History of Russia and the biography of Catherine the Great. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I look forward to talking with you again in a few days' time. Take care. Bye-bye.